Thank you so much for participating in the 12th annual BlackStar Film Festival. We are so thrilled to be sharing in your company and for contributing your energies just all around. It's been wonderful to feel. Of course, we would like to thank our funders and individual donors, as well as our network of producing and community partners. Please follow us on all social media platforms at BlackStar Fest and use the hashtags BSFF23 and BlackStar on Broad. The runtime for this panel, Curatorial Justice, is 1 hour and 15 minutes, so a little longer than some of the other panels. But we will do a Q&A at the end. That's 15 minutes. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator and the entire panel. And thank you to Jemma Desai, who actually curated this panel for us today. So Jemma Desai is a writer, educator, and somatic facilitator based in London. Her practice engages film and other forms of art through research, writing, performance, as well as informally organized settings for deep study. She has previously worked with the BFI and British Council and is interested in the ways imperialism replicates itself through institutionalized work processes. Notably on the subject, she created the project This Work Isn't For Us, which uses theory, memoir, and testimony to weave an autoethnographic exploration of institutional racism in the UK art sector in the form of writing, study groups, performances, and moving image. She was co-chair of Lux, a UK-based international arts agency that supports and promotes artists' moving image practices and the ideas that surround them between 2017 and 2022. She was also the head of programming at Berwick Arts, Media and Film Festival in 2021 and is currently the chair of the Feature Film Programming Committee at BlackStar Film Festival. She is a practice-based PhD candidate in the Central School of Speech and Drama, thinking through the role of political desire and abolitionist practice to tell stories of cultural production with a thesis entitled, What Do We Want from Each Other After We Have Told Our Stories? She teaches units on cultural politics of visual arts, film and performance at various UK universities, and regularly writes, teaches, and speaks on her interest research in a variety of academic and non-academic contexts. Alia Ayman makes and curates film and video and lives between Cairo and New York City. She is the co-founder of Zawa, an art house cinema in Cairo, and a doctoral candidate in sociocultural anthropology at New York University. She's a programming consultant for Berlinale Forum, the International Documentary Film Festival in Amsterdam, BlackStar Film Festival, and the Arab Woman Film Festival in Brazil. She has previously curated programs for Images Festival in Toronto, Flaherty NYC, and Arsenal Institute for Film and Video in Berlin, among others. Abhishek Nilamber works with projects and products which catalyzes democratization of knowledge. He is a researcher and curator at Savvy Contemporary Berlin and creative consultant at Backyard Civilization, Kochi, India. Nilamber has been living and working in Berlin since May 2016. His specific interests lie in contemporary community circulation practices in the Global South, with audiovisual culture as specificity. One of the forms in which this interest manifests is in the research, exhibition, and networking project United Screens. The project United Screens inquires into the challenges and opportunities in South-to-South circulation of cinema and video art, decoupled from its dependence on both state and capital-based markets. We also have Janaína Oliveira, who is a film scholar and independent curator, professor at the Federal Institute of Rio de Janeiro, and consultant for Just Films Ford Foundation. Oliveira has a PhD in history and was a Fulbright visiting scholar at the Center for African Studies at Howard University. Since 2009, she has researched and made films and film programs mainly focusing on Black and African cinemas. She has also worked as a consultant, juror, and panelist in several film festivals and institutions in Brazil and abroad. She's the founder of the Black Cinema Itinerant Forum and was the Flaherty Film Seminar programmer for 2021, which was an amazing program on opacity. Beside participating in other curatorial initiatives, she is part of the BlackStar Film Festival curatorial team, as well as the documentary feature film selection chair. And finally, we would like to name Azar Mahmoudian, who couldn't be here today because of the regime of colonial borders, but we tried. Azar Mahmoudian is an independent curator and educator who lives between Tehran and Berlin. Her curatorial work includes research-driven durational projects, as well as biennial and festival settings. Among recent works with moving image practices at Lux, tuning into the rhythms of the chronic, she also initiated an experimental school for a summer yet to come in Tehran and neighboring places in 2021. She's also a doctoral candidate at the Academy der Bildenden Kunst in Vienna. I did not take German. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Farah. Thank you, BlackStar. It's like, I think it's day 3, so maybe like halfway through, and maybe like thinking about like people's social batteries, and I thought we could start with a contemplation practice, which is completely invitational, but that I think maybe touches on some of the themes around curatorial work. And so I'm just going to invite you to take your attention inward, to lower your gaze or to close your eyes if you feel comfortable, and just check in with yourself. It's about a 5-6 minute practice, so buckle up. And just check in with yourself. How do you feel? How do you know? This practice I learnt from Lama Rod Owens. It's called the practice of the 7 homecomings. It's about evoking your homecoming circle, which you can think of also as your circle of care. So you begin by contemplating the first homecoming of the guide. Reflect on any being who has been a guide, a teacher, a mentor, an advisor, or an elder for you. Reflect on the beings in your life whom you've gone to for guidance and support. Reflect on the beings who express love and compassion for you. Imagine that you're inviting all of these beings into the space with you. Invite them to gather around you in a circle and say out loud or internally, welcome. Relax. Inhale. Exhale and come home to being held by your guides. The second homecoming is your wisdom text. Begin by reflecting on any text that has helped you to deepen your wisdom. These texts can include any writing, books, teachings, sacred scriptures, quotes, memes, or any form of artistic expression like music, dance, film. Any texts that have helped you to experience clarity, openness, or love, or compassion are your sacred texts. Invite the essence of these texts into this space. You can imagine that these texts are actually present, or you can have a sense that their essence is encircling you with their guides. Say welcome to your texts. Relax. Inhale. Exhale and come home to being held by your wisdom texts. The third homecoming is community. Begin by reflecting about the communities, the groups and spaces where you experience love or the feeling of being accepted and supported in being happy. Moreover, what are the communities and groups not only where you feel loved, but also where you feel as if you can love and return love back to others? Where do you feel safe to love? Where are you being loved? Invite those communities and groups into the space around you with your guides and wisdom texts. And if you don't feel as if there's a space like that for you, then you can invite the aspiration to be part of a loving space into this space as well. Say welcome to your communities. Relax. Inhale. Exhale and come home to being held by your communities. The fourth homecoming is your ancestors. Begin by reflecting on those ancestors who have wanted the best for you, including wanting you to be happy and safe. You don't need to know who these ancestors are. All you have to do is contemplate that there have been those in your familial line who want you to be happy. Invite those beings into the circle as well. Also reflect on the lineages you feel connected to, like the lineage of your spiritual tradition or tradition of art or activism. I invite your lineage into the circle as well. As you invite your ancestors, remember that you too are in the process of becoming an ancestor. As you invite your lineage, remember that you are in this moment a lineage holder. Say welcome to your ancestors and lineages. Relax. Inhale. Exhale and come home to being held by your ancestors and lineages. The fifth homecoming is the earth. Begin by reflecting on the importance of the earth under you and how it sustains your life and the lives of countless beings. Reflect on the energy of the earth, which is the energy of sustainability, stability, and foundation. The earth also represents the ground of your experience. So coming home to the earth means touching the earth, acknowledging the earth, surrounding the earth, and allowing it to hold you. And as it holds you, understanding that it is loving you as well. Invite the energy of the earth into the circle. Say welcome to the earth. Relax. Inhale. Exhale and come home to being held by the earth. The sixth homecoming is silence. Begin by reflecting on the generosity of silence as something that helps you to have the space to be with yourself. Reflect on how important it is to lean into silence, allowing it to hold you, and reflect on how you can embrace silence as a friend and or lover invested in your health and well-being. Silence helps you to understand how to use your language to benefit yourself and others. Allow the silence to be present and accept it. Invite silence into the circle. Say welcome to the silence. Relax. Inhale. Exhale and come home to being held by the silence. Finally, the seventh homecoming is yourself. Begin by reflecting on your experiences of your mind and body. Consider how your experiences are valuable, important, and crucial. Invite all the parts of yourself into your awareness, including the parts of yourself that seem too ugly or overwhelming. Embracing yourself as a homecoming means you make sure that you are showing up to being held by the other homecomings. Allow yourself to be present. Accept that you are present. Say welcome to yourself. Relax. Inhale. Exhale and come home to yourself. And when you feel ready, you can join us back in the space. Thank you for practicing together. Thank you, everyone. I wanted to evoke this practice because I think it allows us to maybe reach beyond some of the language that we have to work in sometimes as curators. I'm thinking about two people who are teachers and people whose work that I really admire, Sadiya Hartman and Lola Olufemi, who speak of like abolitionist poetry, and they speak about the sort of sense.
We just hit each other, sorry.
Okay. They speak of like the sense-making siege of anti-racism as like a site of struggle. And as we've talked in our pre-calls, and actually when I've like walked around the festival and listened to panels and Q&As, a lot of talk has been generated around language and the limitations of language. And I think about being English, and I think about speaking English, and that I should not be speaking English, bloody English. But it's the language that we have to bring us together. And I think in curatorial practice, that the way that I think about it is, it can often be about category. Language is like often about category. It's about borders. It's about nation sometimes. Sometimes it's about power. It's tied to networks of distribution, visibility. You know, it's the reason that Azar couldn't be here. Also, this kind of way that borders stop us, for some people, from appearing. And there are many films and filmmakers that we cannot hear or see for the same reasons, and because of these categories, these lines, these borders. Some people have spoken also about like lengths of films, even like stopping them from being programmed. People have spoken about the category of genre in itself, stopping it from being programmed. Like, people don't know where to place your work, so it doesn't get programmed. So yeah, I wanted to start with the idea of language, if that's okay with everyone. I'm thinking about, how that in any way that feels right to you, whether it's the language that we inherit, of the things that we've just talked about, even the term curatorial justice, which is the title of this panel, or the categories of form, or even having to speak English in certain contexts when that isn't where your center is. So however it feels right to connect it to your practice, to speak on the role of language and the limitations of it. And anyone that wants to start, feels called to start, can start.
Thank you for that layered question, Jemma. I think when I'm thinking about language, I'm kind of extending it out into the sphere of aesthetics, because I think language is, let's say, the written and oral form of expression, but then the aesthetics are, let's say, another layer of an extension of language in the written and oral form. And that is something that is kind of like an undercurrent. Aesthetics are kind of like an undercurrent that that has kind of handed down across generations. And this is something that we might, even though we might express in English, but the aesthetics are different, the punctuations are different, the way it's shaped, the textures, both of oral and written, as well as other extensions of it, and especially in the cinematic form. I think, aesthetics are somehow, at least for the ones who are kind of in connect with it, or are in seeking to connect with these, let's say, I don't know if one could call it ancestral aesthetics, or the lineage that we come from. So I said, I think it does not disappear. It always kind of comes across, even though we might express in English, even though we might, write in English or do our work in English, but the aesthetics behind is beyond that, beyond the framework of this particular language. We're just using it for now, let's say.
I'm really happy you started with this question, actually, because I became a curator by a complete coincidence, and I was really young. I was like 23, and there isn't really a word for it in Arabic. You cannot describe it, and the words that exist are fairly limited. So one of the earliest texts I wrote about my practice had to do with the absence of that word in Arabic, and when people ask me what I do, in Egypt, I just say, well, I watch films for a living, because that's the way to describe it. So this element of translation, I think, is such an integral process of our work, and it's also a space where we can really think about how our work takes different meanings and is embedded in totally different contexts, like the difference between working in Egypt and working in Philly and working in Berlin. All of these spaces, I think, invite us to think about, the act of translation as such an essential part of what we do. And I think that many of the films, I don't know if there's any way to find out, but I feel like many of the films that end up making it to us, to our festivals, regardless of where they're coming from, there's one grant proposal or the other that was written in English. So there's also the process of translation is inherent in the process of making films very early on, and it's such a factor in shaping the imagination of the filmmakers and the artists that we're working with, as much as it is also for us both a limitation, but also a space to explore what do we do with those dynamics, So.
Hey, bom dia. About language. So this is good morning, Portuguese. So first, I want to say thank you, Jemma, for creating this panel, for putting us in contact, in conflict, and and in conversation. And thank you, BlackStar, for having this space to talk about creating. So language. So language is a colonial, reminds me also always the colonial domain of things. I come from a very big country, and we all speak Portuguese, like all Brazil, from South Brazil to Amazon. We all speak Portuguese. There are no Creole, no other different accents, but Portuguese. And it was a Portuguese project from the 18th century that worked. So it's, that's to say that, we are always navigating these colonial domains. And when we start the conversation about curatorial justice, one thing that, as being a South person, deep South person, and when you talk about to put together this frame, curatorial justice, the language itself, it speaks where it comes from, and it's North. It's a North way of framing curatorial work, attaching it to justice, and what justice means, and what a curator can do in terms of justice. And I was thinking about this when we were talking, we had our first Zoom, and then I remember a quote that Christina Sharp did in the beginning of the wake, so I'm gonna just read it, just to think about justice together, more close to the way I think about justice. And it's the quote, sorry, I will use my phone, I try my notes. So she's quoting Joy James and Joan Costa Vargas in a piece that's called Refusing Blackness as Victimization. It says, so it's something like, what will happen then if instead of demanding justice, we recognize or at least consider that very notion of justice produces and requires Black exclusion and death as normative. So this is more like, what I'm trying to say is just like when you speak about justice and attaches this to curatorial practice, what does it mean? What are you throwing light to? Like to the work, or to what you do, or to your place in the world? So yeah, so I think this is something that I was thinking about language when we were having our discussions. And also because I think this is how I became a programmer or curator. Even the distinction between curator and programmer has to do with this colonial dialogues, but we can go there later. And because I started curating films as a form of intervention, because everybody, when they speak about, like not everybody, but this is a kind of, thing, when you speak about curating, and people go back to the etymological roots of the word, like curating as curare in Latin, that means healing, it means care, and goes that way. But the way, as an audience in Brazil, how I experienced programs and curating, it was not a healing moment or a care moment, it's a trauma moment. So I started programming and curating in dialogue with that trauma. So curating was a kind of intervention at first. But then you get old, you stop fighting against, and you go more like stopping spending energy with that and talk to the people that you really want, that maybe share the same language that we share. I'll stop here for now.
Does anyone want to respond to what has been said already before I tease up? No? I think like what you're raising is like so at the heart of this, because like the word curator or curatorial practice is like such a new, right? Like it doesn't exist in other languages. So it's there's this text called "We Are Nature Defending Itself," which is called "Entangling Art, Activism, and Autonomous Zones," and it's made by these two activists who left their work as curators, as academics, and they went to occupy some land in the forest in France called the ZAD. So it's kind of similar to like Defend the Forest campaign in Atlanta, which many of you all know about. And they wrote this pamphlet, and they write in it, which I should have known this, but like it's helpful to say it, is that art as we know it is an invention. Like as we know it, as we are working in it. It was manufactured by the white European colonial metropolises. It is only little over 200 years old. It arose hand in hand with the beginnings of industrial capitalism. It rested on the same philosophical myths that enabled extractivism everywhere, the toxic dualisms between nature and culture, mind and body, individual and common, art and life. And I guess like that's sometimes like the landscape in which we're doing our work, but that isn't where our desire or our like commitments are. I just wondered, like, you've started us off so incredibly, Janaína, as you always do, and I wondered if you wanted to speak a bit further on that about, I guess, the messy position of being a curator from the positionalities that we're from, how we're actually sometimes we're sort of stabilizing systems. We're like kind of like connecting embodied art practices with professional management, right? And we are translators of this sometimes, and we have to hold trauma. We have to hold anger from people who feel that they aren't being seen. Yeah, there's a lot of holding here that we inherit, and I just wondered if you wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, so, okay. I'm just, connecting with the justice thing. It's just that what I'm saying is just like, and has to do with my practice, like what I used to call like epistemological displacement. It's just like epistemological, not as a scholarly word, but that's the way you feel thing altogether. It's not like putting the thought one side and your practice. It's just like how you can embody that. So it's a kind of displacement in the way you figured out what justice is, and also what you understand what to be a curator is. And this is also related to the way you put films together, people together, because there was a conversation about positionality, and I was thinking about where we are coming from, because yes, we are just coming from different places and practices. So I'm just trying to say that it's just like how you navigate this world, because being here, not BlackStar is easy, but being here, coming from the South and navigating these wide spaces, hegemonic spaces that, film industry requires you to be, in order to be like recognized as a curator, it's a lot, takes a lot. So how you bridge this with your own experience and the things you want to show without, taking it like as a burden, that's why I really don't believe that we can do justice. That's my point. That's why I was quoting that. And that's what I want to do. I want to share things. I want, for example, that people in Brazil had the kind of experience that they cannot have, because we are talking about, the world, and the world is capitalist, and people don't have, $1 is 6 reais, so they cannot travel here.
40 pounds.
Yeah, they cannot,
80 rupees.
watch things that we are watching. So at first, when I was just doing the intervention thing, I was just like, so how I am so privileged, to be here. How can I share this with people? So programming became a kind of offering for me. So, and I stopped talking against, because we all have this phase, okay, let's agree. And to talk for the people I want to talk. And if they want other people, like white people, they want to join, they're invited, but I'm not worried about them anymore. So I don't know if I answer you, but that's how I'm navigating this, Yes. Oh, you have your mic.
I think one thing I'm thinking about also goes back to your to the earlier practice that had to do with ancestors. In my own practice, at some point, I became obsessed with cinematic ancestors, and I'm talking specifically in the context in which I was working at the time, which is Egypt and the Arab world. And I could not find a precedent for a curator from an earlier generation, right? They did not exist. When they did, they were film critics who would maybe organize like screening programs. Even working for festivals in the way that we do now was not really a thing. So I became obsessed with historicizing this practice, like where it comes from, when did it become a thing, And this was inspired by, like, I'm just gonna share this anecdote. A young film person, like a dedicated cinephile who basically lives at Zawiya, came up to me and she was like,
Can you explain what Zawiya is?
right, so Zawiya is a cinema that I co-founded in Cairo. We call it an art house cinema, for lack of a better word. That word, too, does not have one in Arabic. We just show films that don't have a space to be shown because the Egyptian landscape is mostly blockbusters, Hollywood blockbusters, and popular Egyptian films. So it's become like a space for people who like film to gather and to meet each other, and we've been going for 10 years now. Wow. So she came up to me and she was like, I want to be a curator, so can you tell me how you did what you did? And I kind of hesitated. I'm like, sure, let's talk. But I asked myself if it's wise to train more people to get into this in a context where there is no precedent and in a context where you have to basically, as Janaína was saying, if you don't have opportunities to work in the north/the west, there's very little you can do in the global south with this kind of work, So that's also something that I'm constantly thinking about, the reproduction of the work that we do. Do we want to pass it on? Do we not want to pass it on? What do you want to do with that? So, yeah.
Yeah, kind of adding to that, I would say, kind of trying to tie in the previous conversations, curatorial justice itself is a very, at least the way I conceive it, it's a very political act, and it's an act that maybe like most of us didn't choose, but kind of somehow drifted into this position. But now that we are getting more and more aware of, this is where we find ourselves in, we are also trying to figure out what can we do with that position and what does that offer us, what privileges that it offers us, but then how can we open those privileges to our communities and our peers and people that we've learned from, but also we want to pass on to. I think the question about this position of curator, and we exist in many non-spaces, like West, non-West, insider, outsider. Are you a curator, programmer? So there's a lot of gray zones and borderlands we inhabit. And I think this is, in a way, a powerful position because you're able to translate between these binaries and then kind of queer these binaries and say that this doesn't only exist in this form, and there are these lines actually not there, or they are artificial, and we can create portals between different spaces and different regions. And I think this is where films as a medium is so interesting, because it is replicable. Like, you can make copies of it. You can travel with it without being arrested. I mean, there are people who got arrested traveling with artworks, and books have been banned. I mean, we know about what's happening in Egypt. So
And India.
and India. And so it offers a very powerful tool that we can wield and use for all the quote-unquote progressive works and movements that we need to introduce into the society, especially because we inhabit this position of gray zone. You know, I have an Indian passport, but residency card from Germany that allows me to have a 10-year visa for the US. I was super surprised. But this kind of allows me, this is a powerful position because I inhabit this gray zone. And what am I going to do with this 10 years of US visa? Just a question to myself now. Yeah.
Just about this, we both said about passing it on. So the thing about thinking about what is this job, because this is something people don't talk. This is a work. And I think the reason people don't talk about it, because it's very recent, all the discussion about film curators, because there are art curators. And what film curators, what they're doing, because they used to be in the old cinephile world, like art historians, film critics. They are not take it as a job. It's more like a kind of dilettante thing that you do because you're very smart and super high qualified and you know everything about film. So this is the aura of creators. So when we come back home and people ask us, what are you doing? You have to explain that it's a work, that I'm not an enlightened human being with a brilliant mind, and that's how I come. I'm working, researching, seeing what people see, trying to get a lot of information for places I can't be because I'm from South. So I can't go every year to Cannes, Berlin, or wherever, because this is not, I have to teach to pay my rent. So just as me, but just an example. So it's a lot of work on that. So for me, pass it on is also demystifying this practice and showing people that that's my thing with the justice thing. Because I have the feeling from my perspective that when you speak about it, it's just like you have a power, a kind of power to the justice. But you have a power. It's the open and closed gates. That's also the veil that is the aura of creating as being a super special human being is hiding. Because people are very comfortable in their zones, saying no to people, making very political choices, pretending they are not political, knowing where the films are coming from, who made it, what the labs they passed, and pretending, no, it's because of an amazing piece of work. So I think the important thing is just put it as it is, in the ground, as a job, as a work, and then we can move from there. Because that's why, this series I've been doing, when Alia was in Brazil, Mahmoudian was there, a few people that are here also, it's a series that I've been doing, it's called Politics of the Gays, because how you teach people to be a film curator, how you train people for that. So there's no now there's a kind of masterships, I think in Spain or that, but it's not something that you easily can find. So how will you do that? That was a question I had. So, I started talking with my friends and my peers and my colleagues to understand how they became curators. That's the series, basically. I talk to people and they say how they became curators. To other people that are interested to understand what this is. Because people have no idea what we're doing. So I think this is a little bit the thing about pass it on and using our privileges as our possibilities, our opportunities life gives us for many reasons to be in some spaces, I think. Yeah.
Can I just, to add to that, just separate or invite us to separate, if it makes sense to, the curator role as a job, and then the practice that you all embody, differently in all of your practices. So that's kind of with the practice that we began with, right? There's a connection to something that isn't an industry, there's a connection to a history, a family of knowledge, a desire in yourself to be in the world. So I wonder about that, if that resonates with you, that there's like this separate like professional work that we do, which, you know, you might get taught in an MA on curating, or if you get like a career talk, you know, this is what you do, you go to festivals, you do this, you do that. But then there's the practices, which I know that all of you are committed to in all of your different work, which are about building relation with people, building a commitment to people, you know, showing up at people's houses and looking through their stuff that hasn't been indexed. Like, you know, just all of these things that we do. I wondered if that resonated just to like detach the two things.
Do you want? Maybe I won't answer it or comment on it directly, but I think I'm kind of trying to continue from this position that we inhabit, and what does it offer us still, like to kind of expand on that. And because and the frameworks that we find ourselves in, because when you're, let's say when you're outside or in the South, or maybe it's your element, let's say element space, and then you come inside, and in the North, it's not your element space. So how do you navigate that, and how do you continue to kind of do what your, let's say, curatorial justice in these spaces, and how do you position yourself? So I've been thinking a lot about it in my own practice, and what I've kind of figured out is that when I'm put in a frame like that, where I'm supposed to perform my exoticness, or then I'm not, and seek justice, or kind of become this agent of justice, and all the responsibilities put on my shoulder to do the work. I kind of deflect from that, and I'm not then in that position to seek justice, but to do justice, to kind of do justice with my peers, with the people who I'm, you know, in alignment with. I'm not seeking justice from someone on top. I'm trying to create a network of justice or trust among the people that I like, and people whose political ideologies are in alignment with me. And that creates a net, instead of like the single person who's responsible to do justice or seek justice. And I think, I mean, all great movements in history have been kind of a force of this. They've kind of manifested out of this. So I'm just inspired by that. And I think that's the position that I take when I'm in these, north or inside or on top of the hierarchy. When I find myself there, that's what I do.
Can you just quickly connect what you've just said to United Screens? Because I feel like there's a deep connection to what you're trying to do with that project. Maybe you could give a little bit of frame to this.
Thank you for bringing that up. So formally since 2018, I've been working along with my colleague Laura Klockner on this project called United Screens that looks into how the challenges and opportunities in South-to-South cinema and video art circulation. Essentially, it's trying to create a network of cinephiles and spaces in the South that could eventually kind of create a network for circulation of films that is not dependent on the state or capital-based market. So kind of creating a decentralized network of cinema practitioners and spaces. So when I say cinema practitioners, it extends beyond just filmmakers. It is, of course, technicians, but also programmers, curators, like people who are in hospitality around cinema, but also scholars. So it's a very broad space, but trying to connect it with also an element of emerging technologies, because I think there's an inherent inhibition among our community, at least from what I know, among artists, that there is this inherent fear of technology and like, okay, this is devil's tool and we're not gonna touch it and so on. But I feel that tool is a tool. I mean, it depends on who is holding it and what are you doing with it. So, and considering all these digital technologies that have been thrusted upon us in the last decade, where we didn't have a choice. We just had to accept what has been designed in Silicon Valley as our everyday life tools. So maybe there is a possibility to kind of inquire into how technology could allow us to do community work and collective work. So this is what I'm curious in United Screens. But I'll be happy to chat more in smaller circles. Thank you.
So many things to say, but I want to go back to this question about separating, because I'm thinking that in many contexts, and not just in the global south, but also in places where the infrastructure for the arts is not as intense as it is in somewhere like New York or London or Berlin, there is no room for those separations, right? Like you start out, if you are a filmmaker in a place where there are no cinemas, you will make the film, you will distribute your own, and you might as well find yourself trying to create a festival, a cinema, or maybe even a VOD for it, right? So these like separations between clear lines of vocational divide, this comes with the hyper division of labor that comes with being in a place like New York or whatever, right? Like in Cairo, for example, a lot of us as filmmakers, we build our institutions because nobody else is doing this job for us, right? Because also when you mentioned like going through someone's documents in the absence of a formal archive, that's what you need to do to find a film that was made in the 80s or something. So it's interesting to think about those divisions in that way. And I also wanted to comment on what Janaína said about what we do as work. It's also important to point out, I think, that we have a very bad reputation as festival programmers specifically. Like, I feel like the job is, many artists and filmmakers have approached us, or me specifically, with a lot of like ambivalence. You know, like they feel like we are the gatekeepers and we are the reason why their works are not getting shown. And when you talk and say something, like for example, I'll be very specific. There was this one film by a filmmaker that I don't know, that nobody really knew, that got in to one of the big festivals that I was consulting for a couple of years ago, and people were wondering, well, how did it make it into the festival? Because they assume that we do not watch the submissions while we spend hours doing that, right? So it's also, I think, important to place this kind of work as one that is regarded with both like contempt, like people don't like it, but they also do when you show their work. So it puts you in a very interesting position vis-a-vis the filmmakers while you're supposed to be on the same side. Because technically, our job is to work with filmmakers, not against them, right? And that's something that I hope someday we manage to get to, but I think we're still a bit too far from that.
I think that has to do with, that's my point about unveiling things and saying put framing as a word, and just telling people what we do, just for people to understand in the multiple ways, the things we're doing, that's not only one, this is one of them. About separating things, so I'm pretty much more like aligned with Alia on that, just like this is for me, it's not an option. I'll frame it differently. I'm not interested in separating these things. That's why it makes sense for me. That's the great and the good and the bad part of it. Because you're talking the bad part. But the good part is when you're doing this and you're just able to manage to put the things you want on that framework, that's art, and people don't appreciate that. I'm just saying. So how you manage to, bring our values, the things that we matter, the people we want, not only the films, but their actual presence, because that's something I believe what changed things, this status quo is presence, like physical presence, like people there. Like we just have our colleague here that was not able to be here because of, colonial borders. So many artists, we program films, and the artists are not able to get there. So what we're talking about. So I think this, when I'm proposing to bring it like to this, let's say, grounding perspective, just because I think also film is this. Films happens in the world, made by people. It's an immanent thing. It's not like this Eurocentric perspective of art that I don't share. So I think this is also the kind of invitation that my practice as a film curator has, like in everything I do. Like, this is it. I know who are making the film, where they're coming from. I try to understand the politics, navigate the politics. But that's the thing, And of course, it takes a little bit the glow of it. But also put things in another way, and yeah, that's why, where my perspective, the justice part of it, like as framed, doesn't make any sense because it's a political thing. It's an intervention of it all the time. From the moment I wake up, great part of people, we are like majority black or non-white, so we know this. It's not a choice not to be black. That's how people see me. I'm the black woman. So in white spaces of film curatorial practice in Brazil, people think usually that I'm there because I'm quota, That's how things are framed. They don't understand how I was working for Locarno. They don't understand why I was working for Flight. They really don't get it. They feel like you can see in their bodies when I'm in the room how uncomfortable they are. So why not put this on the table when I talk about my practice? Because it's there all the time. It's there all the time. We all been navigating this space. We can feel it, how people look at you like, and then after knowing you for 5 years, they start respecting you. So that's, my point about putting things together. And not in any moment, like, giving up on inspiration, on thought, on things that you want to see. And, I made a whole program based on an idea of a partitor, like literally quoting Edouard Glissant without making it an academical debate. Like, it's not, just like I put up 18 programs during 10 days, just basically the same thing, and just inviting people to have another cinematic experience. And it worked. It could be wrong, but it happened. It was good, that's what I get from people. I had a good experience, though. And it was challenging, and it was pretty much what I wanted, with the films I wanted and the artists I wanted, but inside a very, let's say, traditional institution like. So how navigate this? This is the thing.
It's just making me think, actually, what you just talked about, what you've all just spoken about, is that maybe the title of the panel shouldn't be curatorial justice, it's like curatorial dancing. Like, you're just like moving around all these spaces. I want to open it out to the audience. We've got like about 10 minutes for audience questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. Yeah, there's one here.
Thank you. This is an excellent panel, by the way. I just got introduced to curating, so it's kind of overwhelming, but I'm glad I came.
We feel the same.
I have a question regarding going back to gatekeeping. Can you speak to, I guess, the latitude or longitude of being the gatekeeper and the advocate?
Gatekeeper versus being the advocate, or what did you say, the longitude and the latitude?
Right, and all the spaces in between. Like,
Yeah.
She talked about, okay, why my film didn't get in the festival, but you have others in the festival, so now you think you're creating spaces, but now you feel like you're excluding people from spaces. So where does the space in between being the advocate and the unfortunate seen as the gatekeeper?
I think it's, I love this question because I also ask it to myself most of the time. There are moments where I'm not sure why I have to not accept or not be able to show certain films that I really want to show, that I think belong in that particular festival or the other, but for some reason, mostly often out of my control, whether it's like too many films, not enough space, or like too many films from the same region, right? Because that's like something to think about when you're talking international festivals. We are all quotas. They want a piece of the world, and if they have like too many Latin American films, that's it. That's it's too much, right? So there are these moments where you feel like you're a gatekeeper and you're not very happy with the fact that because with big festivals, you kind of you learn to see like the institution. You become the institution. It's no longer about the films you like as a cinephile or even as a curator. You are the festival, right? So you're seeing for the festival. And there have been moments, and I'm talking from personal practice, where I had to reject a film for one festival and program it for the other, and I'm the same person, right? So because it did not fit there, but it fits here. Yeah, so there are these moments, but then there are the happier moments when I'm able to block a very problematic film, one that is like all about poverty porn and like trauma porn and like let's show war all over the world and suffering and all that stuff, and I'd be like no, and it's a no. And there are other moments where you find really special films and they just land in your pile, and you advocate for them, and they make it, and then these films have a life afterwards, and then you feel like, okay, it's not too bad, you know? Like, I'm not just the evil gatekeeper who makes filmmakers suffer. So the answer, I think, is that as Jemma was saying, it's a dance. Sometimes you're on that side, sometimes you're in the other, but that's like part of the job, and that, again, has to do with the infrastructure that we're all working within, right? So.
More questions?
Hi, thanks so much for the panel. I guess just building off the last point about like sort of the premise of international festivals having, you know, these kind of quota systems. I guess I would just be curious for any of you to sort of speak about curatorial frameworks that you've created that you felt like really effectively disrupted some of those kind of conventions that, you know, that you might be asked to operate in, whether they're, you know, thematic or you know, whatever your strategy has been for really, you know, kind of disrupting those boxes.
Thank you for the question. I would say one recent thing that I had the blessing of curating was films of Yugantar Film Collective, which is the first feminist film collective from India. They were active between 1980 to 1984, so four very intense years. Very tumultuous years also, because there was a lot of political upheaval in India around that time, emergency and lack of space for expression and so on. And in these 4 years, they made 4 films that were kind of an embodiment of, without calling it like, I don't know, anything cool, or they were just doing collective cinema work. So what they were doing, was going into communities, for example, in Burning Embers. It is this one film, like, where they go, these 4 filmmakers who go into a factory of women tobacco workers and film with them. So I say it with them, you know, highlighting it with them, their political consciousness building and organizing towards asking for basic wage from the factory worker. So they filmed this whole process in the span of 3 or 4 months, but staying with them, staying in their houses, and kind of making filmmaking decision, like what needs to be shot or what needs to go into the film with the people who were from that community. And yeah, it was so it was programmed as part of Berlinale Forum Expanded. So it's kind of like an extended section of Berlinale film program. And of course, there were these 4 films shown, but also the research around their own research around making these films, but also other archival material. But the twist that we brought into this curation was that during the 10 days of Berlinale, we organized lunch at 1. So it was like a collectively cooked lunch every day, and people could come, hang, and then eat with us, eat with the filmmaker, and then we programmed every day of those 10 days something around collectivity, to ruminate about what does it mean to be a collective today. So we had I'll give an example. We had 70 women strong women's collective from Berlin who called themselves Frauen, die Druck machen, which means women who make pressure or stress. And they were actually a printmaking collective. Or they are a printmaking collective. And we hosted them and kind of had them do a workshop around printmaking. And so this was let's say, a way to kind of go beyond what is expected to be in Berlinale, because food is definitely not part of Berlinale.
That is so true. Is there any more questions? Is there someone there just behind you, actually?
Hi. So speaking to the separation or non-separation of all these different roles when you're a curator, especially coming from the Global South, how you kind of have to be the archivist and the historian and the curator. But then, I don't know, I kind of see the role of a curator as sort of creating these instances where you're working for a festival and it's kind of like a temporary amount of time where people can access all these things together. Can you kind of speak more to when you're going through these archives that haven't been indexed, how much is there that you're doing to make these archives, I guess, accessible beyond the moment of a festival or beyond the moment of a screening series?
So basically the question is, how do we make those archives accessible beyond that particular? So one thing that people have done is, in the absence of copyrights, they upload those films on YouTube and they become accessible to the world. Another thing is, there has been independent initiatives in different parts of the world where, in the absence of official archives, you go and you find private collections in people's houses, and then you basically donate these to given institutions that are free and accessible to the public. So in Cairo, there's a space called Cimatech, and it's basically an independent film archive that has film and non-film material that you're able to access. And this whole work was basically a labor of love. It was volunteers. Initially, during the revolution, when we were young and excited about life, we went to people and we did this work, and now there is a collection.
You young, Alia.
But yeah, so there have been some, I think, moments where these initiatives were able to kick off. And I know that it's not just only in Egypt. I know of one in Jordan. I'm sure there are more in India. And then there's also this unofficial network of circulation when people reach out to, if you screen this film somewhere, someone who wants to show it will find you. They will ask you for a link, and you will ask, and then pass it on. So I think this informal network of circulation has become a form of, not a replacement for archiving, but another way to do it in the absence of official archives, You become the archive in a way, so.
And also just on top of that, what kind of archive and images are you talking about? We're talking about, because, for example, talking about the Brazilian experience, photography, I'm not talking even about films, it's not a black thing, it's not like US, that you have Black people take pictures like, we don't have this. So even like if you get, for example, the guy that is we consider like the Black, the founding father of Black cinema in Brazil, his first film, we just lost, the print. So what kind of archival we're talking about and memories? So there's a whole process of, filling gaps, imaginating, critical fabulating, about things or images that we don't have. That's also included in this practice, And this is one thing. Another thing, it's making it available when it's possible. So, but also this kind of reflection, because you navigate different, like, non-white spaces. Archive means different things. Maybe your job as a programmer and a curator is just like help bring this up. Not even the images, but the absence of them somehow, sometimes.
I love that. Like, you're leaving a trace, whatever you do, because I think this whole thing about this unofficial network of circulation is very important, but also those conversations that happen about, like, I can't find this work. Like, have you found it? And you're trying to find other people to ask those questions and hold those questions. I think that's like some of the work that I think is sometimes like missed. And the idea of leaving a trace, if a program happens and it has a certain level of visibility, I always think that there is like someone has seen that it's been possible to show it. So they know that there's someone knows where to find it. And before that's happened, people don't know that. The Uganda Film Collective films are a really good example of this. They were restored in 2020. And they've circulated a lot online, but they actually haven't been connected to the audiences that they served in that way, right? So they were directly for those communities, those unions. They've been shown really only in institutions now, and it's like that reconnection to those audiences that hopefully will happen now after this trace has been left. Yeah. I wanted to wrap up now. Unless there's one last question, if anyone has an urgent question, please raise your hand. I just wanted to finish with a really short practice, just 1 minute. Just turn your attention inward, lower or close your eyes, and just try and find like the place in your body that feels the best, that feels really good. Don't search and search and search for too long, just find a good place. And just try and think of as many qualities of this sensation. The location, the color, the shape. And just think about how it feels to turn your attention to the best possible place. And then when you're ready, just join me back here to thank the panelists, Abhishek, Alia, and Janaína. And our translator as well.